Hi, Tony Lange, 37 and a half years of firefighting experience in country bushfires. Been in 3 burnovers, been involved in quite a few firefighting rescue operations, and yes, I've felt the heat of the lot. Um, I'm going to talk about loading firefighting aircraft in South Australia. I'm amazed at looking at YouTube, looking at people with experience, creating incredible ideas that are sometimes very primitive but extremely inventive. Then some engineer comes along and uses it with a little more polish. I'm not a member, so faces and crew identification has been blurred out as much as possible. After a lot of involvement in bush firefighting on the fire ground, in the most extreme conditions and many years training crew members, I was retiring from my business when I was approached to look after the airstrip at Mount Crawford as a volunteer. This interested me as I had worked at Mount Crawford Forest for around 12 years. I had checked with my wife to see if she would also be part of the adventure, which when she retired she was extremely interested in helping. These guys were doing it tough, heavy lifting, hot, dusty and extremely filthy when loading retardant. I knew I'd need to come up with several improvements to improve conditions. These guys not only did it tough, but they were often out of sight, out of mind, and most times when the aircraft returned to their home base, they were not informed and often forgotten. They were often left out of the food drops and were not thought of. We had a fridge freezer and Leone and I put 6 frozen meals in for emergencies. If we used them for an incident, CFS would replace them. We would then use them ourselves at the end of the season so that fresh ones could be put back into the fridge for the next season. This is the old form of mixing retardant. It was extremely dirty, dusty, and created a lot of problems. It was bags had to be cut open, transported to the end of the table, and tipped in, and it had to be done exactly right, otherwise it would not mix together correctly. Training was essential. To operate, connect delivery hoses to aircraft, open aircraft valves and delivery hose valves. Getting the system right, making sure that the right valves were opened at the right time. Training was always essential. Valves needed to be operated. All valves were open. There should have always been one tank valve left open to prevent expansion and pressure in a manifold when leaving the airbase. When I first became involved, we had a banjo valve on the pump which allowed the hose full of water to spill onto the loading area when disconnecting from the aircraft. Then we put it at the end of a 30-metre hose, and it still involved bending, lifting and difficult line up onto the aircraft fitting. We had a 10-metre length which was too short and dangerous, which put the pump just away from the wingtip. I requested a 20-metre length and it became a standard length at all air bases. We still use the 30-metre length if setting up a second fill point. It allowed a bit more room for the aircraft when loading from the same tank. The next thing I needed to concentrate on was the old crew had their individual jobs, so I concentrated on everyone training for every position. If we had a big job and we were flat out loading multiple aircraft, fatigue was going to be an issue for some positions. Training was now very important and most of the crew were retired, but I needed to start to blood a younger crew. So it was necessary to run 2 training sessions, 4 p.m. for the retirees and 7 p.m. for the crew members who worked. We were spending a lot of time making changes. Pre-season media days were held at Mount Crawford, and afterwards there was necessary to have a debrief, and all of our crew was involved in the debrief on what had happened during the course of the day. We scored a new member from Lyndoch who was skilled and very keen, so we obtained an old tandem trailer sitting at the region and set it up so that everything needed to run the airbase was all on the trailer. Then I painted it at home, still doing these changes as volunteers. This allowed us to drop the trailer and have a vehicle for clearing the airstrip of livestock, and it was free to chase supplies. We had a 200 litre tank of foam concentrate on the vehicle. I soon transferred the foam to the trailer to keep the operation going, and we introduced skates to reduce the workload and the wear and tear to the hoses on rough surfaces. Then we had our first big test of our training and changes with Eden Valley Fire. Air Operations Management was concerned about the number of loads that were going out of Mount Crawford, and their concerns were with fatigue. We had no issues. Everyone was rotating through all positions, and we even looked after our own catering with being forgotten about again. We became of age. All went well. I did have a bit of video and photos from the fire and from training, and used them to look at our system to see where I could make changes for further improvements. I was concerned with the position of the original tank that was delivered to Gawler, so I sought permission to relocate it down the airstrip so that we were not operating so close to the end of the sealed area, and it also gave us room for a second fill point after I had added more fittings to the tank. It was a great idea, as we soon needed the second fill point. I kept watching videos and making changes to the system, making sure that everything was all on the trailer, all in one position and could be used. I made up some training aids, as aircraft were not always available for training and we needed to be able to use the entire system. We still had a difficult connection to the training aid, and so we looked to see if we could make some changes to the system, as it was always difficult to line it up directly onto the aircraft fitting. I borrowed a 1 metre length of suction hose and put the banjo valve onto the first gate to avoid the carrying of the 2 metres of hose filled with water. I still noticed that the crew had to bend to pick up the short length, and so I made up a T-bar on the skate for the hose to stay upright. I made up some handles to put on the lead skate out to the aircraft, but I didn't have the connection to the skate when we had a fire out of Gawler and we were pulling the skates with the short hose. We broke the male fitting, and so when we replaced the fitting I went to an alloy fitting for strength. My wife and I had been testing the system up and down the hill, in and out of every ditch around the home, and then introduced the new system with the handles and the short hose to the crew at Mount Crawford, making a couple of changes. Then I took it to Gawler for the approval of our crew who were training at Gawler. We had a training day at Mount Crawford with a new retardant mixing plant, TARP. When the manager of the air operations saw the skate system, he was interested in making it a state standard. It was copied by an Adelaide company for billing. They failed to copy the attachment of the handles to the skate, and the copied handles rubbed on the skate wheels. Experience and full knowledge of the operation will always look at all aspects and get it right. And its operation. And yes, I used it in an operation for its first big fire. It was used on the second day of the fire, and it was so slow, dirty, no valves to shut off hoses when changing IBC. The third day I arrived at the airstrip with a heap of different fittings, used one of our filling pumps and loaded more loads and much quicker. I then had to improve to drain the retardant hopper, as there was no provision for emptying it. A few days after that, the manager of the air operations came up to Mount Crawford and asked me to draw up the changes to redesign the unit. It went back for modifications and all of my ideas were implemented except for the second hopper, so that one could be filling aircraft while the other was being filled. I then went with the training and loading mixing supervisors to show the operation of the tarp. We got a new trailer which gave us the ability to load thermogel, but I didn't have any means of draining the hopper or cleaning, so I made some changes to the plumbing and we could now return unused thermogel back to the tank, clean the system, and I made up some hoses we could drain completely with this equipment, but only use water, as thermogel is a real problem to clean and can create a lot of problems if it is allowed to get back into the tanks of water supplies. Filling the tank at Gawler with a 30-metre length of hose, which required draining and rolling up even after one load. The quote was knocked back, and so we finished up doing it ourselves at a very small cost. The skates had been a problem on the vehicle and trailers, and with the new trailer and the extra tanks, most of the time it was left to me to stow them safely. So I spent some time in my shed setting up boards and clamps and skates till I came up with a solution of hanging them on a rack after clamping it all together. I got a couple of guys in to see my changes to spare wheel location, and one of our guys completed the change exactly the way that I'd put it all together. I then took it to have it ball weighted and tested to see that it was legal. All good, and it was even better after I suggested removing the 200-litre tank of salt water from the trailer, as it was more convenient to carry a bag of salt, as we always had plenty of water. Experience again was needed. We were loading multiple aircraft for a very fast moving fire, and the prop wash was blowing our skates around. One of our offers had decided to load the skates on their side to stop them from moving. When I saw what was happening and that they were now bending to put the skates over and then to put them upright to use them, I simply showed them how to bring the skates back a little further in line with the prop wash, and they didn't move. Experience again, and then safety. Made some changes to the trailer at the YP. We were also involved in training and field days, and so this was our training exercise that we had over on the peninsula. Then we went to a container on the York Peninsula, and so it was necessary to turn around and make quite a few changes to the setup in the container and transferring the pumps and everything and making a lot of different adapters to suit. They put 2 tanks at the airstrip at Angerson which had no nearby water supply. I made up a system on the trailer so that we could load aircraft direct from the tankers, and when the aircraft was full we continued into the tanks, allowing tankers to head off as soon as they had been emptied and having put more water back into the tanks for future loading. We had a different vehicle for a while, as our trailer had a tank problem, and yes, while we had it, I modified it so the hopper could be drained and cleaned properly before the truck went back. I had been involved with very large air tanker loading in Victoria, so with moves afoot to be able to load air tankers here in South Australia, I was invited to help with ideas at Edinburgh RAF base. I was surprised with what they were attempting to do, and as I was needed to look after multiple aircraft in our area, I decided to appoint someone else to be involved there. I could see that with extremely large pressure at a RAF base, they would have problems with the system they had designed to load the aircraft at Edinburgh. They've now turned around and changed to what I had suggested. Available for training, I developed and designed a couple of drums, and with the use of a small pump we were able to operate the entire system with water and use the same filling method as using an IBC and a retardant mixing plant. The guys could do the full amount of training. These drums could also be used for using old retardant for training. They would work quite successfully. In fact, I would have even been able to use these drums to actually fill an aircraft if we had a problem with a tarp, or if we wanted to set up a second fill point. These drums were quite useful for that same operation. We only ever had an AGM at the beginning of the season, and then at the end of the season we would have a family get together at our house. And the idea of this was that we could talk about the season, we could discuss anything that we needed to do over the off period, and it gave everybody the opportunity to all be there together, have a little bit of a chuckle and a bit of a laugh, but most importantly it was a family function and it involved the family, and we were able to have a lot of presentations and things like that was necessary, and invited air operations management. Recent fires have seen the system work successfully and can be operated with ease. It is a lot less demanding than any position of firefighting on the fireground. Just about anybody could work on an airbase now. Thank you for watching this DVD this video that I put together in relation to loading aircraft, firefighting aircraft in South Australia. Thank you. I believe in using experience. I was once redeployed to a forest fire up north, After the fire was brought under control, I came across a crew about to pull several lengths of hose to a high hotspot halfway up the steep hill. I suggested driving to a track at the top of the hill and add lengths of hose from the unit down the hill. They liked that, but when they had finished, they started to pull their hoses up the hill. I told them to drive down the bottom and they could pull all of the hoses down with little effort. Common sense and experience is a winner.